So I also want to talk about how this is a form of ecocide and a major global form of ecocide, probably unparalleled to any other industry. Fracking, besides the frack gas that I just showed you, also known as shale gas, having the worst profile of emissions of any fossil fuel, including coal, fracking as an industry is also a leading cause of accelerating global warming all over the world. So a groundbreaking science report published in August of last year by Dr. Howard in Cornell University in New York, he's a leading expert in methane emissions, showed that fracking has been responsible for more than half of all of the increased global methane emissions of the world during the last 10 years. And 1/3, that's half when you take into account from all fossil fuels. If you take into account all sources, that stands for more than 1/3 of the total. So as a major driver, and as I said, methane is 87 times worse than CO2 during the first 20 years in the atmosphere, which is more time than we have left to act, then we are actually speeding in the wrong direction away from going into reducing emissions and doing the exact opposite. NASA has also shown in a report that the record methane emissions of the last decade were linked to the fossil fuel expansion, but they avoided mentioning fracking explicitly, like everyone does. You will not find this in the COPs, in the United Nations, or in the IPCC, which mostly is trying to avoid the topic as well. The bottom image is from infrared camera showing the constant venting of greenhouse gases at fracking operation plants that under the naked eye you cannot see, but it's a constant part of the process through venting and flaring and burning that is causing all of this to happen. So what I want to, this is probably one of the most important pictures that I want to show you, is that it's bad enough that we have fossil fuels and we need to leave them in the ground immediately and move to more renewables. But fracking was developed to save the fossil fuel industry from extinction and in turn take us all into extinction. When we were supposed to reach a peak oil moment in history, after which it was expected that oil prices were supposed to go up, and then investment into renewables would already become more attractive for investors. But fracking was developed was fully blown in the late 2000s, and it consists of going deeper into the ground, into the unconventional reservoirs of shale gas and oil, and it takes a lot of energy and water and chemicals to extract these resources. But the basins, the shale plays all over the world are enormous, as you can see on this map. And these are the ones that have been certified today. They're always discovering more and more. There's enough here to continue extracting oil and gas for many, many more decades to come. And just to give you an example, I'm pointing the cursor here in Argentina, where I was coming from in the region of Mendoza. And this alone, called Vaca Muerta, it will consume 15% of the global carbon budget when fully exploited. The global carbon budget necessary to comply with the 1.5 degrees Celsius target. So, and this is just one. Imagine all the others that you can see here. So this is the second largest shale gas reservoir. It may not look it in terms of extension, but it's very thick. So the thickness is another component of the image. So this is taking us faster in the wrong direction instead of where we need to go. It's enough we need to leave fossil fuels under the ground. It's even more important to leave fracking and shale reservoirs underground. It's just, this is the greatest paradigm of human greed at the expense of the planet and human life. So in this speeding toward the abyss, you can see this is also from the US Energy Agency, the origin of the gas produced in the US, how after the late 2000s became to exponentially grow more and more proportionally being shale gas. And this is how, if you see toward the year 2040, how the US will be providing so much of the world gas as it will be coming from shale. And then this shows also the destination of this gas, and a lot of this gas will go and is going into LNG exports, which Europe is one of the major destinations, already the third recipient in the world, but Europe is the world's biggest importer of gas, so it's only set to continue into this dependency for more and more fracked gas. So fracking, I assume a lot of you already know what it is, but briefly I will explain that it involves the novelty, the innovation that allowed this to come into the so-called revolution, shale revolution, is the horizontal drilling that was developed that allows you to go deep into these reservoirs and then drill several hundred meters into any direction, fracturing the rock, which is very tight, where the gas and oil are trapped in bubbles and they need to be freed to be harvested, right? So in order to do that, they use explosives, then they use a lot of water. It can take up to 40 or 60 million liters of pure water per well. And this is usually taking place in areas that suffer from extreme water scarcity, such as where I come from in Argentina. Not only that, but this water is mixed with nearly 600 chemicals, many of which are extremely toxic and have been shown to be carcinogenic and cause illnesses of all kinds and death in people and animals. This contaminates the water tables, contaminates the soil. The piping is always fracturing and is contaminating everything in the way. It contaminates the air as well, because when the flow back from these operations usually brings back radioactive radon, for example, that is volatilized and is carcinogenic at very low concentrations and extremely long distances, not to mention heavy metals as well, and anything that is deep underground. This could be as deep as 5,000 meters deep. In Argentina, it goes from 3,000 to 4,000, depending on the area. In the US, many of the shale basins are a little less deep, but it depends on where you are. But it involves a lot of energy, and that's why fracking is a lot more expensive to do than conventional drilling. And as I will show you, it's not even profitable. It's become a bubble, a financial bubble that we are fighting. One of the major problems with fracking is the water contamination. And again, below every slide, you will be able to get all the links to the science and the documents. These are from documentaries, Gasland in the top left, which people in the US in many places can set their water on fire due to the methane contamination and many other chemicals. To the right, you can see a river in Australia on fire near a fracking tower. And this is happening in a lot of places. So the health consequences are enormous. It affects pretty much every system of the organism, and in many cases it's lethal. In New York, where fracking has been banned in the state of New York, they showed, a scientific report showed that living within 16 kilometers of a fracking well is linked with high risk of birth defects. People in Argentina, in the areas affected by the fracking wells, the children are dying of leukemia at a rate that is triple the national average. And this is going unpunished. This is going with complete impunity, and there's no legal recourse for them. Activists are being persecuted by a weaponized justice system. And much of this is happening at the hands of foreign European multinational oil companies. As if all of that was not enough, fracking is also being proven to induce earthquakes, and that's the reason that it was banned in the UK recently. It's not a full ban, they put a moratorium, but also across most of Western Europe, fracking has been banned or has a moratorium or some very strict regulations that does not allow them to frack in Europe. Then you can see at the top images the increase on earthquakes in Oklahoma from around 2009, the intensity and the number of earthquakes multiplying. So the legal status in Europe, as I just showed you, is mostly banned. This is a graph that is not up to date, but it's the most recent available online. And here, Spain and the UK should be red as well, because Spain has now committed to a full ban on new licenses for fracking, and the UK has put a moratorium. Yet, it is from these very countries that have banned fracking that the biggest global fracking players are from, and the biggest players in the global south, such as in my country. There is Wintershall from Germany, Total from France, Shell from the Netherlands, BP and Pan American Energy from the UK, Repsol from Spain, not currently operating in Argentina, but elsewhere in the world. They actually discovered Vaca Muerta. And I will show you also how OMV from Austria is involved in this in a major way, even though they are not fracking directly. So, as if all of that was not enough, fracking is linked to a plastic boom in the world. The shale revolution, so-called, has allowed for an abundance of shale gas coming, and cheap gas for the US to have plenty of. And this gas also contains a lot of natural gas liquids, so-called NGLs, including ethane. And ethane is the raw material for a lot of the plastics that are manufactured. The ethane content of the shale basins is enormous, and it's usually a lot more than you can find in conventional gas basins. That's why this has led to a revolution in plastics that keep polluting the oceans and the world. That's maybe why governments are not taking any serious steps to stop it, because the lobbies of the plastic industry and the petrochemicals and the oil industry are all working together to prevent any restrictions on an industry that they are putting their bets on to keep growing. So in 2011, you can see here, Ineos, one of the biggest plastics producers of Europe, began to build this petrochemical plant, getting ethane from the US, from the LNG, when the reserves in the North Sea were going down. This is from a recent article in DW, showing how oil companies are pivoting to plastics to stave off losses from the fossil fuel demands. So because of the corona pandemic, and you can read this article later, but basically what I put here in the red rectangle is, in the last 10 years, companies including BP, ExxonMobil, and Shell have invested $89 billion in 210 chemical projects linked to America's shale gas boom alone, according to the American Chemistry Council. And a further 133 projects are being planned or in the process of being built. This is really expanding. The US plastics production is on course to be expanded by 1/3 just from the shale gas production. This is what I was telling you about ethane production. This very clearly shows how since the inception of fracking, the amounts of ethane produced have grown exponentially. And if you can read the text in the rectangle, the ethane supply in Appalachia, is a fracking region, is expected to be 20 times higher by 2025 than what it was in 2013. So the growth is 20-fold. So, and this is why Ineos and many other companies have seen this opportunity to get raw materials to expand their plastic production in Europe. And the US really has a glut of ethane that needs to go overseas, so that because otherwise it's not profitable. They don't have anywhere else to put it. That's why they need to expand the plastics industry all over the world. And here is the role of OMV. OMV is not fracking directly. They actually, when we looked on their website, it said that they actually have a page dedicated to saying that fracking has no place in OMV, and yet they are directly linked to this plastics production from shale gas, and they actually the biggest in Europe and one of the top 10 in the world. They have a joint venture with Total, another huge climate criminal and major global fracker, they, through this joint venture with Total in the US and the major stake they own in Borealis, they are the biggest producer of plastics from Europe. So this is just more information from the same article. The amount of stock and how much is 4.68 billion to raise the overall interest in the European petrochemical manufacturer to 75%. So this is something that you in Austria could possibly put a lot of pressure to change. And soon, this Friday, we're going to do a global campaign of international solidarity called Shale Must Fall, where we're bringing pressure to these companies. And it will be great so that OMV can also feel the heat and we can get this to change, because it's a major driver of the climate crisis. Lastly, as yet another tentacle of the fracking industry, it's its connection with the fertilizer industry. The shale gas, the methane, is being used to produce nitrogen ammonia using the hydrogen from methane, and that's also leading to a lot of exponential growth in fertilizer production, the fertilizer industry that is depleting the soils of the world, rendering many of them unproductive in a very short term, and that we also need to move away from. So this is just to show how many bad aspects of this industry there are that are not even mentioned in our debate in Europe, and that we can change that, and we must change that. Because although this is not a problem in Europe, and this is the reason it's not being discussed, why would you talk about fracking? It's been stopped in Austria or in Germany for a long time, but actually Europe is playing a major role by having their companies do the fracking and then consuming the products and making plastics and fertilizers and producing energy from it. So, and why do we need to do this? Well, if we are going to rely on the environmental establishment, we are doomed. If you go to the IPCC website, you will barely find any reference to fracking. And when you do find, you will be surprised that they're praising it. The one report that I could find where they talked about fracking was only to praise it, as you can see here, which they're saying that the production by fracking has allowed increase and diversify the gas supply and allowed for a more extensive switching of power and heat production from coal to gas, and that this is an important reason for a reduction of greenhouse gas emission in the US, which I just showed you. The exact opposite is the truth, according to the world's most renowned science. So how is it possible that they are lying like this? I was in Madrid last year for the COP25. We were organizing a talk about this topic with Fridays for Future in the Parallel Social Summit. And we did that, but they also, Fridays for Future had a spot in the official COP, and they wanted to get the talk in there, but it was rejected. And nobody in the COP, nobody made any official presentation on this major global issue. Why do you think that is?